Hello, this is Sally Ducharme, and I'm here to talk with you about the astrology of another event that occurred not on this day in history, but close to this day. It's difficult to create a chart for the first Thanksgiving. We know that there was a harvest feast held between the Pilgrims and the Indians in the fall of 1621 in Plymouth, Massachusetts, but no one was standing by to record the date. So that holiday that we celebrate when we're in elementary school, when we dress up as pilgrims and Indians and bring in a snack to share, that's kind of a amorphous date. We don't exactly know when it occurred. However, we do have a date when Thanksgiving was established officially as a national holiday by none other than President Abraham Lincoln. In 1863, he took time off from his, preparation of the Gettysburg Address to issue this proclamation declaring that the final Thursday of the month would be Thanksgiving, and final Thursday of November would be Thanksgiving. He'd been under a lot of popular pressure, especially from a noted women's magazine at the time, the Goodies Ladies book. And I think in issuing this, his intent was to help bring our fractured nation together, to give us that sense of unity, and also just to help people reflect on their blessings in the most difficult of times. And so this proclamation went out, and Thanksgiving was duly observed and continued to be observed ever since. So if we look at the astrology of that day, I just did a noon chart, so we can't look at the houses, but we can look at where were the planets that day and how were they aspecting each other. And of course, ta-da, what's happening on this day but this beautiful Libra stellium. We see, of course, the sun is at its fall in Libra and Mars is in its detriment in Libra. And they're conjoined, so showing just the weariness the nation was experiencing from the long years of war and the horrible losses that almost every American experienced at that time. But we see also that Saturn is with that, kind of enhancing the world weariness, but yet Saturn is exalted in Libra. And what is the planet that's guiding this stellium but Venus in its own sign, kind of the leader of the pack here in Libra? And so we have this very powerful image of Venusian energy, that sense that Abraham Lincoln had in issuing this proclamation that we are heading our nation, we're kind of pointing our nation towards peace and unity, that sort of coming together, that partnering with each other was the hope in issuing this proclamation. Notice also at this time that Neptune is in Aries, the warrior sign. And so we have that opposition between the Libra planets and Neptune in Aries, showing that, kind of the drum beats of war were continuing. There was still that fighting, there was still that anger, there was still the bloodshed. And yet in counterpoint to that is this hope that we can create something more enduring that's going to live on past the time of war. And notice too that Venus and Saturn together indicate longevity or endurance. That this is something that this proclamation is something that would endure throughout time. However, we say, well, Lincoln, one other thing I wanted to point out to you too is that Mercury, which you think of proclamations, something written, something issued, Mercury at that time was stationary, which makes it very loud, so that message would go very clearly out to the nation. And it's also in trine to Uranus, which is also stationing in Gemini, another air sign. And so that Uranus in Gemini is kind of an electric energy that kind of spreads far and wide and reaches a lot of people. So when you put together Mercury and Neptune working together, you get a very powerful message going out, and that's going to endure throughout time. But Abraham Lincoln did specify that Thanksgiving would always be held on the fourth or on the final Thursday in November. And every year the president, this was not a law at this time, it was just a proclamation that presidents issued every year. But what happens in 1939? But Franklin Roosevelt, who was, wrestling with the Depression, trying to bring prosperity to people, noted that Thanksgiving, the final Thursday in 1939, would be November 30th. And the merchants, of course, came to him saying, please, it's shortening the days before Christmas when people will be shopping. That's really going to impact us negatively. So Franklin Roosevelt, very agreeable fellow, just said, okay, well, this year I'm going to proclaim that the fourth Thursday, not the fifth, and final Thursday will be Thanksgiving. And you would think who would have a problem with that, but of course, tons of people had a problem with that. And so we see the first Thanksgiving on the outside wheel of the original proclamation chart. And what's happening on this first Thanksgiving, or this Thanksgiving, was Saturn was at that time in Aries, not in good shape in Aries. Saturn doesn't like to be in Aries. And it's opposing that Mercury of our proclamation. And the moon, of course, and the south node are joining in with it that day just to add further negativity to that day. And so what happened that year was that the people who liked Franklin Roosevelt had their Thanksgiving on November 23rd, and those who didn't like Franklin Roosevelt stubbornly held on to the final Thursday, and they were celebrating Thanksgiving a week later when everyone else had finished up their leftovers. So you can see that the whole purpose and meaning of Thanksgiving was totally shot in the foot at this point. So by 1941, after wrestling with this for a couple of years, Congress just said, okay, enough. If you remember 1941, December 7th was the bombing of Pearl Harbor. And, American people and Congress had much bigger fish to fry. And so on December 26th, just weeks after Pearl Harbor, Congress just passed a law and said, okay, let's just do it this way. We'll do the fourth Thursday always. And so we'll put the proclamation chart with the law. This became now a law that Thanksgiving would always be on the fourth Thursday of the month. And so what's happening on that day, but you see Mars is very quick and fast, has come back to that point in Aries where Saturn was. But also, another thing I like about this day was that Venus and Jupiter were really creating a lovely trine to each other. We have Venus, which is in the sign of Aquarius, that brotherhood of man, liking to create cooperative networks of people, is in trine to Jupiter in Gemini. And so you think about Jupiter being, among other things, our laws, the way we organize ourselves, the way we create a coherent working society. So we have the two benefics working together on that day when Congress just said, fourth Thursday, no more arguments, no more Thanksgiving, no more having to go to two Thanksgiving because some of your relatives were Democrats and some of your relatives were Republicans. This is it. And I love too that if you put this trine together with the proclamation chart, you see that a grand trine is created, bringing back that spirit of people coming together in peace to celebrate their blessings with each other. So I just love that everything came back to this original proclamation chart, and how that chart continued to live throughout the decades that had followed Abraham Lincoln's proclamation in 1863. But just for fun, I wanted to see if I could get some sort of a chart together for that original Thanksgiving feast, because I thought I wonder if there was just some sort of correlation between the 1621 feast and Abraham Lincoln's proclamation nearly 250 years later. And so what I did is I just kind of randomly put together a chart for the harvest feast using October 3rd. Remember, it was the autumn of 1621, so I did October 3rd, 1621. And then I put with that the proclamation chart. So we'll do the harvest feast, and then we'll do Thanksgiving as a national holiday on the outer wheel. So the harvest feast, again, we can't look at, where was the sun, where was Mars, even where was Saturn would move quite a bit over six or 7 weeks. But look what was happening when Abraham Lincoln issued that proclamation. We were having a Pluto return. And you can see of that original Thanksgiving feast. Pluto is again, remember, the United States is having its first Pluto return 250 years after its founding. And so at this point in 1863, when Abraham Lincoln issued the proclamation, it has been a Pluto cycle since that original Thanksgiving feast held in Plymouth, Massachusetts in 1621. And of course, Pluto in Taurus showed, Pluto annihilates. And it showed just the deep struggle for survival there was at that time. These are people who went and gave up everything and went into the wilderness and had nothing but their own, just the own labor of their hands. And then finally, the help of the Native Americans who were there that helped them survive those first really difficult years in the New World. And also, the Pluto is in Taurus again during the Civil War, again, a very deep, deadly struggle to survive as a nation. And so Pluto coming back to that point reignites that sense of we are engaged in a deadly struggle. And the only way we're going to survive is if we depend upon each other, if we work together, and if we also just kind of dig deep from this experience and celebrate the abundance that we experience, the blessings that we have when we do survive. And so, kind of those three counterpoints of the first Thanksgiving kind of come back into our consciousness as a nation with this proclamation. Just that deep, deadly struggle to survive, the need we have for each other in order to survive, and just the abundance and blessings that we experience when we come together. And so I just love that this proclamation was issued at the Pluto return of our original Thanksgiving feast. And also Neptune is a slow-moving planet, so I think we can look at the Neptune of the fall of 1621. And of course, where was Neptune then but in Libra? The ideal of partnering, that, clutching onto each other's hands in order to pull together in this world. And so that Neptune in Libra was being ignited by this beautiful stellium in Libra when the proclamation was issued in 1863. So I just love how there are some, even though we can't get an exact chart of the harvest feast, I just love that at least in the slow moving planets, we can see that our decision to celebrate Thanksgiving as a country had its roots and resonated with the spirit of the time when the Pilgrims and Indians were struggling together in the cold shores of Plymouth, Massachusetts. So I thank you so much for joining me to take this look at the astrology of Thanksgiving. And I wish you all a very wonderful holiday. And I send a prayer for your peace, your prosperity, and for the peace of our world as a whole. Thank you. Bye.